Imagine a world divided, two superpowers standing toe-to-toe, each armed with the power to obliterate the other. Welcome to the Cold War. As the dust settled on the battlefields of the Second World War, an entirely different kind of conflict began to take shape. One that wouldn't be won with tanks or soldiers but with ideology, power, and the looming threat of nuclear destruction. The era of the Cold War had dawned. In the post-war period, two nations emerged as the world's superpowers. The United States, a beacon of capitalism and democracy, and the Soviet Union, a stronghold of communism and state control. Both were left standing amidst the rubble of a world that had been torn apart, and both held fundamentally different visions for what that world should look like as it was rebuilt. The ideological rift between the two nations grew deeper and more pronounced. The United States championed the principles of free market and individual liberty, while the Soviet Union promoted a system where the state held control and wealth was shared equally among the people. These starkly contrasting ideologies set the stage for a global power struggle that would come to define the latter half of the 20th century. In 1946, former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill delivered his famous Iron Curtain speech. He spoke of an Iron Curtain that had descended across the continent, dividing Europe into two starkly different spheres of influence. This metaphorical curtain represented the ideological and physical boundary dividing Europe into the Western Bloc, led by the United States, and the Eastern Bloc, led by the Soviet Union. And so the race was on. Not just a race for influence and control, but an arms race. The United States and the Soviet Union began to amass vast arsenals of nuclear weapons, each knowing full well that their use could mean the end of civilization as we know it. This was a war of attrition, a war of threats, a war of fear. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shape the world for the next 4 decades. In the face of growing Soviet influence, America responded with a doctrine and a plan. Emerging from the ashes of the Second World War, the world was divided. The Soviet Union was expanding its influence across Eastern Europe, prompting a decisive reaction from the United States. Enter the Truman Doctrine. Named after President Harry S. Truman, this policy marked a significant shift in American foreign policy. No longer would the U.S. stand by as nations fell to the sway of communism. Instead, Truman proposed that America would provide political, military, and economic assistance to all democratic nations under threat from authoritarian forces. This was containment in action, the effort to stop the spread of communism. But the U.S. didn't stop there. Recognizing that a strong Europe was a bulwark against Soviet expansion, Secretary of State George Marshall proposed a comprehensive aid program to rebuild Europe. This became known as the Marshall Plan. It wasn't merely about dollars and cents, it was about building economies, strengthening democracies, and ultimately, combating the appeal of communism. The Marshall Plan provided over $13 billion, a staggering sum for the time, to help European nations rebuild their economies and infrastructure. It was an investment in peace, prosperity, and the free world. But it was also a calculated move in the chess game of the Cold War, an effort to create a Western bloc of nations resistant to Soviet influence. One of the most dramatic manifestations of this East-West tension was the Berlin blockade. The Soviets, aiming to force the Allies out of Berlin, blocked all land and water routes into the city. In response, the Allies launched the Berlin Airlift, a mammoth operation to supply the city from the air. For almost a year, planes flew round-the-clock missions, delivering food, fuel, and other necessities to the beleaguered city. The Cold War was more than just a military standoff. It was a battle of ideologies, economies, and wills. This battle would shape the world in ways that still resonate today, a testament to the far-reaching impacts of the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. The competition extended beyond the Earth, reaching for the stars. As the Cold War waged on, both the United States and the Soviet Union were determined to prove their technological prowess and ideological superiority. The battlefield? Outer space. In October 1957, the Soviets shocked the world by launching Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit the Earth. This metal sphere, no larger than a beach ball, beeping its way across the night sky, was a stark reminder of the Soviet Union's advancements in technology. It was a wake-up call for the United States, a clear message that the Soviets had taken the upper hand in the space race. In response, the United States doubled down on their efforts. In July 1958, President Eisenhower signed the National Aeronautics and Space Act. giving birth to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA. With its creation, the United States was ready to take on the Soviets in this cosmic competition. The following years were marked by a series of firsts. The first human-made object to reach the moon, Luna 2, was launched by the Soviet Union in 1959. Then in 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth, another feather in the Soviet Union's cap. Undeterred by these successes, the United States pushed forward, setting their sights on the moon. The Apollo program, initiated in 1961, aimed to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth. And in July 1969, Neil Armstrong took that one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, becoming the first human to walk on the moon. The space race was not just about exploration, it was a demonstration of technological superiority. It was a symbolic contest, a reflection of the ideological battle waged on Earth. The competition for the stars was yet another front in the Cold War, a testament to the lengths nations would go to assert their dominance. The space race was not only about reaching the moon, but also about reaching for the upper hand in a world divided. Even the coldest wars must eventually thaw. As we navigate the final chapters of the Cold War, we encounter a policy of détente, a thawing, if you will. This term, literally meaning loosening or relaxation, was used to describe the easing of strained relations, especially in a political situation. The détente period, starting around the late 60s and stretching into the 70s, marked a significant reduction in Cold War tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. Yet, this was not a time of idle rest. Both superpowers continued their strategic chess game, albeit with less direct aggression. Arms control agreements were reached, including the landmark Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, also known as SALT. These agreements aimed at curbing the arms race were indicative of the changing tides. However, the détente could not hold back the inevitable. The Berlin Wall, a concrete symbol of division, was to fall. In the late hours of November 9, 1989, jubilant crowds began to dismantle the wall. This spontaneous act of defiance against decades of division marked the beginning of the end for the Cold War. But the final nail in the coffin was yet to come. The Soviet Union, straining under economic pressures and growing internal dissent, found itself on the brink of collapse. A series of political upheavals throughout 1991 led to the eventual dissolution of the Soviet Union. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet flag was lowered for the last time over the Kremlin, replaced by the Russian tricolor. The world watched as the once formidable superpower dissolved, marking the definitive end of the Cold War. The ideological battle between capitalism and communism, which had held the world in suspense for more than 4 decades, was over. The global chessboard was left forever changed. The Cold War ended not with a bang but with a whimper. The echoes of the Cold War still resonate today. This tense and tumultuous period left an indelible mark on the world, shaping the political, economic, and social landscapes in ways that continue to influence us. Politically, the Cold War saw the rise of the United States as the world's sole superpower. The dissolution of the Soviet Union marked the end of a bipolar world order. With this shift, the United States emerged as the dominant force, wielding considerable influence over global affairs. This change, however, did not come without challenges. The vacuum left by the Soviet Union's collapse led to regional conflicts and power struggles, some of which persist to this day. Economically, the Cold War brought about significant changes. The Marshall Plan, a U.S. initiative to aid Western Europe's recovery after World War II, laid the groundwork for the modern global economy. This economic strategy not only helped rebuild war-torn Europe but also established the United States as a leading economic power. The social implications of the Cold War are equally profound. The ideological battle between communism and capitalism seeped into every aspect of society, influencing culture, education, and even sports. The space race, for instance, not only propelled technological advancements but also fostered a spirit of competition that transcends into various facets of society today. The aftermath of the Cold War also saw the emergence of a new world order. With the United States at the helm, this new order is characterized by an increased emphasis on liberal democracy, human rights, and free market capitalism. Yet it also underscores the complex challenges the world faces in maintaining peace and stability in an increasingly interconnected and volatile global landscape. The Cold War might be history, but its lessons are as relevant as ever. As we look to the future, it's important to remember the far-reaching implications of this era, and strive to understand its impacts. After all, the echoes of the past often hold the keys to navigating the complexities of the present.